Hey, everybody. Good afternoon in the East. Good late morning in the West. I am Reed Galen, co founder of the Lincoln Project and your host of Lunch with Lincoln. Today, I am very excited to have my guest on today, excuse me, Hugo. Hugo Lowell writes for The Guardian and has been covering all things January 6th since this started going. So, Hugo, first, welcome.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, we were talking before you joined us this morning. Is like literally every tweet you post is like breaking news. So that is something to be said, especially in an information heavy town like Washington D.C. But I want to, as the hearings get ready to start again tomorrow, I want to ask you, what did you think you were going to see as these started? What's been your impression so far, and then where do you think we're headed from here?
I was worried that when we got to the start of the hearings that the committee, because it's political and it's not, they're not federal prosecutors, it's not DOJ, that they would make connections which might be potentially suspect. It might not all be evidence led, and that it might be a convenient narrative that the committee puts together. I think as these hearings have gone on, though, I've been relieved of that fear because it has been so evidence based. I think a lot of the things that have come out in the hearings have not previously come out, and so that is always great to see that they've managed to uncover new things. Not least that there are two key points, right? First of all, that Trump and his associates knew that the election was stolen, or everyone was telling Trump, all the president's men, to borrow a phrase, was telling Trump that the election wasn't stolen and that there was no evidence for election fraud. We hadn't seen a lot of that testimony before. And then the last hearing, or the most recent hearing, we heard about how Eastman and Rudy Giuliani and the White House lawyers all believed that the Trump plan to pressure Pence on January 6th was unlawful and unconstitutional, and yet they went ahead anyway. And the more I sit through these hearings, the more I'm struck by how much evidence they have to demonstrate Trump's corrupt intent, which I think would go a long way if this is ever prosecuted by the DOJ.
Yeah, and so there was just a couple of things. One, there was a survey out, I think it was this morning or maybe over the weekend, Hugo, that said 60% of the respondents said that Trump should be prosecuted for what they're seeing. But also on an anecdotal level, talking to some partner organizations we have in South Florida that work in predominantly Black and brown neighborhoods, registering voters down there. They're reporting. They ask a little battery of questions as they're talking to folks as they register. It's filtering all the way down there too. So that I think that a lot of the Republican talking points, which have basically been process, witch hunt, gas prices, inflation, regular Americans certainly are worried about that, and as am I. But it does not. It does seem that folks are able to hold two thoughts in their head simultaneously.
Right. I mean, both things can be true at the same time, right? You may have rising gas prices, and you may also have a former president hell bent on destroying how the electoral process works and how democracy works. And I think the fact that it's filtering through is really interesting. I think the other thing that came out of the ABC News Ipsos poll the other day was that the number of people who think Trump should be held responsible for January 6th and the Capitol attack has actually increased in the last year and a half. Republicans coming into these hearings were betting that there was a lot of January 6th fatigue and that people would be like, it's just more January 6th news. But it does sound like people are tuning in. And the number of people who are swayed by the evidence is increasing, which I think is really important and really telling when you kind of consider what the committee's trying to do here, right? They've been trying to tell the story of January 6th, and then they knew they needed to tell it in a compelling way. And the fact that it's filtering through suggests to me that they are being successful in doing that.
Well, and as we started these things, right, you saw that again the full sort of right wing outrage machine was ramping up. Axios ran a story about all the things they were going to do. Fox wasn't going to cover it. They had Hannity and Ingram and Tucker commercial free for 3 solid hours. And after that first hearing, 20 million people show up, and the entire right wing sort of idea goes kaput. Right now, it's Kevin McCarthy and Elise Stefanik, they might be building their bunkers in their backyard. Like you can't get it, you can't find them, you can't. They're not saying anything. You still get the Jim Jordans of the world saying witch hunt. You see Trump, in the bridal suite down in Mar-a-Lago, being more and more hysterical on Truth Social. But the truth is, it does appear that a lot of Republicans, including those who voted with Trump on January 6th, are now trying to disappear as far into the shadows as they can.
Right, and I think the broader question, we should always step back and consider what the committee is going to do. This was never about appealing to Trump voters. This was never about appealing to Jim Jordan to change his mind. This was always about speaking to independents, in the middle, who suburban voters who might not follow January 6th particularly closely, that might not follow political news particularly closely, but to speak to them and to say, look, this is what Trump was doing. He was knowingly and corruptly violating multiple federal laws, like defrauding the United States and obstructing a congressional proceeding, to try and return himself to power. And, do you really want a politician like that back on the ballot in 2024? And, that was really the message. So, Jim Jordan, as far as I'm concerned, can keep going around saying it's a witch hunt or a partisan investigation. But the fact of the matter is, multiple federal courts have already ruled that the committee is both legitimate and has a legitimate legislative function. So these attacks are without merit, and they're without substance. And what I've noticed is that these Republicans, as these hearings have gone on, have been saying that less and less. And I do wonder if that's a factor that has come out, because if you see the evidence, it's really difficult to argue with it. No one's, not even Republicans, not even the diehard Trump allies on Capitol Hill, are defending the facts. They're all trying to attack the process. No one's saying Trump didn't do this. They're saying, oh, we don't have a proper minority on the committee. And I don't think people are swayed by that. And I don't think that's going to work this time around.
And it's a little bit interesting because, Hugo, as we talk about those sort of DC, I don't want to call them establishment Republicans, but let's call them elected leaders, right? Federally elected leaders. They're sort of sitting on the rail of the boat, trying to figure out whether or not it's time, the SS Trump, whether or not it's time to jump, right? Simultaneously, what we see out in the states is whether or not it's with a guy like Doug Mastriano, who's running for governor of Pennsylvania, whether or not it's the Texas GOP coming out with this crazy list of things that they want to do over the weekend at their convention, is that there seems to be this weird topsy-turvy world where the Beltway is like, oh God, oh God, oh God. And the Republicans out in the states are, they're out of the cage even further.
Yeah, and there was always going to be this disconnect. And I don't know if that's, I don't think there's anything politically that the January 6th committee or Democrats or anyone else can do about that. I mean, you mentioned Mastriano, right? Like, Mastriano's aides were around on January 6th. I mean, it all comes back to January 6th, which is what I always find fascinating about all of this. But there is certainly a disconnect, and I'm still trying to digest how to interpret that. How on the one hand you have these hearings that show clear evidence of criminality, and on the other hand you have grassroots Republicans who turn a blind eye to everything that's happening with these hearings. I think there is an element of it's difficult to unpack. I think I don't quite understand how it's possible. I guess I come back to what I was saying earlier about how the hearings were never about convincing those MAGA Republicans that what Trump was doing, that they already concretely believe that what Trump was doing was not bad and that it was just politics. But the more that Republicans push, what they're trying to do in Texas, the more that you have Proud Boys entering grassroots politics in Florida, I think the consequence of all of this is it pushes independent voters away from really extreme Republican MAGA policies. And I think the January 6th hearings is just one element of that.
During the last hearing, the attorney for Pence, Jacob, I thought that his testimony, as he was discussing being with Vice President Pence in the loading dock, where they had moved him. First of all, I didn't know that it was. I don't think any of us knew that it was. Only 40 feet between the mob and Pence and his coterie. I found it compelling, and I found it absolutely. I mean, look, I'm an old advance man, an old presidential advance man, right? Like I've been in more motorcades than I could remember. Thankfully, we never had anything that approached anything like that. But I can imagine, with my experience, having been in that loading dock, right, with a protectee, not only just a protectee, but the Vice President of the United States on the phone, looking at someone else's phone, looking at the video. I mean, it was riveting, I think. And I think that a lot of people, the Twitter sphere, I think, gave Judge Luddick, too hard a time for his, I think, very staid and thoughtful way that he presented himself. But in modern parlance, if it got off to a slow start, I thought it ended just with a sledgehammer.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to, and everything you just described, I think speaks to the fact that the committee is doing these hearings in a very clever way. On the one hand, you have this appeal to the American public about how Trump put his own vice president in danger, right? This whole thing about 40 feet away, that's a really riveting fact. And the 40 feet is something anyone can conceive of. And to think that rioters, some of whom, as this confidential FBI informant said, were hell bent on killing Pence if they had the chance, being so close to the vice president is really chilling.
Say this, just to interrupt. If it's half that distance, those agents start shooting.
Right, and you would know that as someone on the advance team. This is very, very serious. Right. And I should just say the 40 feet, I believe, was when he was coming out of the chamber and was temporarily held in his ceremonial office,
right?
Floor. When he went to the loading dock, that's about five floors down from there, in a different part of the Capitol that I probably shouldn't say any more about. But on the one hand, they have these riveting facts for the public to digest, and it's really compelling. And on the other hand, they've also been able to present the evidence in a way that prosecutors might. And that really speaks to the second audience that they have, which is, of course, the DOJ. And, being able to throw both out to, appeal to both audiences, I think is a very clever way of doing these hearings so that they manage to cover all of their bases.
Well, and that's the one thing that obviously I think that, there have been a lot of folks critical of Judge Garland for not moving faster on Trump. He said last week, I'm watching these hearings. Justice Department is watching these hearings. And so do you think that, and I know that the DOJ, at least, look, the DOJ is a political animal. It always has been, but it's always, at least internally or reputationally, tried to hold itself above. But now it appears that, whether or not it's the AG or his top advisors or the prosecutor saying, like, we don't want to prosecute this stuff because we're not like, Hugo, we're not like Israel, right? We're not like France. Like, we don't put our politicians, in Illinois, Louisiana, New York, yeah, they put them in jail all the time. But nationally, we very rarely prosecute national figures, maybe members of Congress, but not presidents and vice presidents, with the exception of the Nixon administration, one who quit and the other one who got pardoned. And so this is just very unfamiliar territory. But it does appear that between what the committee is showing and the creeping up of public opinion on this stuff, that the Justice Department seems to be leaning further forward than it has been.
Right, like DOJ is not supposed to consider politics when they, open criminal investigations or they kind of make decisions about whether to prosecute people. But inevitably, they do, and it comes from both sides, right? On the one hand, you got Democratic pressure and January 6th committee members pressuring DOJ to say, look, we have clear evidence of crimes, of fraud, of defrauding the United States, multiple felonies. And on the other hand, you have Republicans saying, this would be unprecedented and it would kind of shatter. I don't quite understand how it would shatter the rule of law, but that's what congressional Republicans are saying, at least. But I think DOJ has been making quiet progress with January 6th prosecutions, and they have been moving up the ladder, right? Most people, I don't think, pay very close attention to exactly what the DOJ is doing, and DOJ moves very, very quietly in these areas.
Right.
From my reporting, I can now establish that there's one grand jury impaneled to look at the rally organizers on January 6th. There's a separate grand jury impaneled to investigate the Trump lawyers and political operatives who were advancing the fake elector scheme. When Garland said that he was watching the hearings last week, he also said something else, which was internal Office of Legal Counsel guidelines say that I'm not precluded from opening an investigation into a former president or a president. That also is very telling. The fact that he knows that suggests that Garland has asked the Office of Legal Counsel, can I prosecute a former president? And then on top of that, you see these new letters that are coming out from DOJ to the committee asking for transcripts from witness depositions. And they're not asking for specific transcripts because that would give up the game on who they're investigating, but they're now asking for all of the transcripts. And I think those four things put together are very significant. And if you're looking for any indication as to what DOJ is doing and how seriously they're taking January 6 prosecutions, I think that is a very good indicator.
So are you surprised by how many people have testified before the congressional committee? How many of them were so willing to say, Stepien, right, who is no hero, right, but said, I told the guy, you're going to lose, and he got mad at me, right? And do you think that you'll see? Will there be more people? Because this is something Hugo is in. I lived in Washington for many years, worked in an administration, worked in Republican politics for a long time. I know some of these people, right? And I have a hard time believing that, one, that they're going to lie to a congressional investigator, and two, they're sure as heck not going to lie to a federal officer, right? They're not going to lie to an FBI agent. They're not going to lie to a U.S. attorney. So do you think that there are more shoes to drop in this regard? I mean, even Alyssa Farah, who I'm no fan of personally, said was it over the weekend? Oh yeah, well he said, I can't believe I lost to a guy like this. Do you think you'll see more of that as these weeks go on?
I think so. I mean, in part only because the transcripts that we have seen to date and the testimony that we have seen in the hearings to date are only slivers of hours long depositions, right? Going into these hearings, I was making this point in my reporting about how the transcripts that we had seen were only excerpts. We saw excerpts of Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony. She was, of course, the one of the top aides to Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. We see excerpts of Eric Hirschman's testimony, who was the White House lawyer in the final days.
He might be stealing the show with just sort of his demeanor and his background, just to be totally superficial.
Right, but also, he steals the show. Not least because of his background, but also because his testimony is so explosive. I mean, this was a White House lawyer that was there at the most crazy moments of the Trump administration in the final days and weeks. And I think people don't quite understand the significance of some of these people. Like Eric Hirschman was at the craziest of meetings in the Trump White House. He was at the 18th December meeting when Trump had a meeting with Michael Flynn, Sidney Powell, Patrick Byrne in the Oval Office, that then moved to the residence. Rudy Giuliani came in. That was that pivotal moment when Powell was trying to get Trump to sign a piece of paper to make a special counsel and to seize voting machines. Hirschman was there. Hirschman was there all the way through the end. He was there when Derek Lyons, the White House staff secretary, was no longer there, and so he had to take over some of these duties and kind of preserving pieces of evidence. He was there talking to Rudy Giuliani. He was there talking to John Eastman about how the Pence plan for January 6th was completely unlawful. Eric Hirschman has seen it all, and we have only seen a sliver of his testimony, whether in court filings or in the public hearing. So I think that there is more to come. We're only 3 hearings in to a 7-hearing or 7-part event that this committee is structured. So I think there is a lot more to come, and I think the evidence so far has been so damning that we can see more of that.
Why? I mean, they started with 6. Now they're moving to a 7th. Why only this many, and why in so compressed a time frame?
Well, I do know internally that the committee was worried about running up against Supreme Court decisions, particularly the Dobbs one with the abortion ruling, and they were trying to squeeze them in before the Dobbs ruling came down, because the moment that ruling comes, well, it's not clear if anyone would be listening to anything else. It sounds like they're going to run headlong into this now that they've spaced out the hearings to 7 and they've got stuff in the final week of June. But it's 7 because the committee settled on Trump having a 7-step strategy to overturning the election, and they want to lay out prong by prong, and I think that's a very smart way to do this. I mean, you're effectively showing the public, this is his plan number 1, this is plan number 2, plan number 3, and this is how it morphed together. And that really is the story of January 6th. It wasn't the Capitol attack wasn't like one-off event where Trump happened to show up on the ellipse and told people to march on the Capitol. It was the culmination of weeks and months of efforts by him, his top advisors, his top counsel, in trying to overturn the election. And it very nearly succeeded on January 6th. And it was only because Capitol Police held them off and kind of Pence decided that he wasn't going to become the guy that destroyed democracy, which doesn't make him a hero, by the way. It just meant that he was doing his job. That was the only reason why January 6th wasn't successful. But I think the committee is trying to show that the Capitol attack was just one part of a 7-step strategy that Trump had to overturn the election.
I think, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think about this. It's sort of individual acts and blind luck, right? Pence says, okay, I'm going to do what I'm supposed to do. Eugene Goodman, right, holds off a mob, distracts them, while that sort of iconic image of Mitt Romney, of all people, very staid, very thoughtful Mitt Romney running for his life,
Right.
right? Could have gone really, really badly. I want to ask, what do you think's coming up? What we've got hearings starting up again tomorrow. What do you expect to see?
Well, we've got just in broad brushstrokes, we have the fake electors and Trump's pressure on the states to send alternate slates of electors. Remember, this was the strategy that underpinned his strategy for January 6th. Eastman's whole thing about having Pence reject the slates of electors for Biden at the congressional certification was underpinned by his other strategy of having states send these dueling slates of electors. As it turned out, the states weren't sending them, so he told Pence to just ignore the entire electoral count act or violate the electoral count act and simply delay the session to give states time to send these slates over. So that's the next hearing, and then on Thursday we've got the Trump's pressure on DOJ. That's about how he wanted to replace the top leadership at the Justice Department with Jeffrey Clark, the environmental lawyer who bought into some of Trump's claims. And then when Trump dangled the attorney general role in front of him, the rest of the DOJ leadership threatened to resign. The following week, the penultimate hearing, we have Jamie Raskin leading the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers and the militia groups hearing, where he's going to unpack the coordination. And this, I think I'm most interested in this hearing because these are the guys that breached the Capitol in the space of about 20 minutes from all sides. This was totally coordinated in advance. We see these guys being indicted for seditious conspiracy. DOJ has all of their text messages, but the committee also has all of their text messages. I know for a fact that the committee has the Oath Keepers signal chats, the encrypted messaging apps, because one person went to the committee and just handed over all of their communications. So that is, to me, really fascinating, and I want to see if the committee can connect the coordination among the militia groups to anyone higher, and whether that goes back to the White House. That's a penultimate hearing. And then the final hearing, we expect the committee to outline the 187 minutes or so that Trump, during which Trump knew the Capitol had been breached and then did nothing. And then ultimately they will show through inaction that he obstructed a congressional proceeding because he didn't want to call out the National Guard. In fact, we now know that he made no effort to call out the National Guard or Park Police or any sort of reinforcements during that period. And then at the very end, he got forced to issue that statement very, very reluctantly, saying the Capitol, the rioters should leave the Capitol.
Well, and that's the way we saw that letter from the acting Secretary of Defense, Chris Miller, saying that the National Guard shall not be activated, but for my personal command, which I think is atypical to say the least. And then there was that brief testimony from General Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, saying that Pence was calling, saying, "Get those guys down here, get those guys down here." Obviously, you've got the commander in chief sitting at the White House, who that's his job. The vice president, is a ceremonial job largely, right? But now everything's topsy turvy. Because maybe Trump's not answering the phone, maybe whatever, but it was fascinating. But the thing I want to talk about just in our last few minutes is the introduction of political violence back into the American lexicon. Because you talk about the Proud Boys and the 3%ers and all these folks, and now we're seeing this stuff pop up more and more. There was just I think it was late last week or over the weekend. Representative Dan Crenshaw from Texas being, he and his staff being accosted, largely based on something that Tucker Carlson had said, at the beginning of the Ukraine-Russia war. You saw that Adam Kinzinger produced a letter addressed to his wife and family saying, "We're going to kill you. You're going to go to hell." So it feels like, Hugo, that a lot of the stuff that was performative in 2020 is now becoming real.
Yeah, and I think that is very chilling. I think, when the Proud Boys started thinking, when the Proud Boys got the shout out from the former president at the debate when he said, "Proud Boys, stand back and stand by," that really energized them. And that, from what I understand, according to my reporting, was one of the biggest recruiting events or recruiting moments that the Proud Boys have ever had in their history. They gained hundreds of new members immediately after that day. And so you can draw a direct line from Trump to the Proud Boys to political violence, because that is exactly what has happened. I just want to mention one thing, what you were saying previously about Trump and how he didn't do anything. Like, Trump didn't want to call the National Guard because January 6th and Eastman's plan was the the only thing left in his arsenal to stop Biden from being certified president. He needed the rioters to be there. And this has always conditioned my thinking when I'm trying to report on this investigation. I'm trying to report on what happened in that Capitol attack. This has always been in the back of my mind. Trump had no other option to return to the White House if the Eastman plan failed on January 6th. And so, of course, he didn't want to issue a statement to call these guys off, because them delaying the certification was the only thing he had left. So that has always kind of weighed and loomed large for me. And I think people should kind of keep that in their mind when they're watching these hearings. Like, what was Trump trying to do? Why did Trump try to do this stuff? But coming back to your political violence point, the Proud Boys are becoming more emboldened. Like I said, Proud Boys are now infiltrating grassroots politics in Florida. Dan Crenshaw is getting accosted by people in broad daylight with no shame. I mean, this is not how American democracy is supposed to function. You're not supposed to have, the First Amendment is not there to protect people commit acts of political violence or threaten political violence against elected members of Congress or the vice president, right? And so I do feel like we're regressing, and it's really chilling. And I hope that the committee's hearings and the DOJ is able to hold people accountable to send a message that political violence is not acceptable, because that's the stand.
Right. And that's, again, having been to New Hampshire and Iowa and South Carolina and all these places as many times as I have over the years, so many of these events, that you take for granted, it's somebody running for president. They're a mid-tier candidate, governor, or maybe not a governor, let's call it senator, right? But people otherwise without protection, right? When you're a governor, your state detail comes with you. Usually the local state police help out. But for a lot of these people, they're going up on stages, they're by themselves, right? Maybe they have a guy, but it's certainly not a coordinated security apparatus like a former president would have, or a sitting president would have. And so that's the other part too, is, if and when Mike Pence decides to run for president, right? Like what does an event look like for him? Right. I mean, what does the host have to do to ensure that these folks, I don't want to take it to too dark a place, but, Hugo, my imagination's awfully vivid at this point. And so I think it's just, it all comes back to that.
If Kinzinger appears in public again, I don't think it's a stretch of the imagination, given his letter that he posted, the letter that he received, which he posted on Twitter, that he might come in harm's way.
Right. And that's the whole ballgame. I mean, that's the whole idea, right? Scare people away from participating in the process, keep your head down such that, I'll stay safe, my family stays safe. And then the rest of it all sort of collapses around us. Well, Hugo, before I let you go, is there anything else you can share with our viewers that might be of interest?
Well, I am really interested in where DOJ is going and DOJ's reactions to the January 6th committee's hearings. And so I don't know if everyone caught the news over the weekend or kind of late Friday, early weekend, that the committee is starting to enter discussions with the Justice Department about how to turn over those witness transcripts. And of course, the DOJ mentioned that they wanted the witness transcripts to help their case with the Proud Boys who are facing seditious conspiracy charges. And so I think that's a very interesting development because they are going to get all of the transcripts by the sounds of it. Now, the committee is actively working with the Justice Department to turn over some of the evidence. So if people are concerned or worried that DOJ is not doing anything, I think this should assuage those concerns to some degree.
Well, Hugo, I want to thank you for joining me today. I hope you'll come back a little later in the summer after these have wrapped. For everybody else out there, remember that tonight at 7 o'clock Eastern, we've got Maya May and Trigby Olson, The Game We're In. And tomorrow following the hearings, breakdown live with Rick and Tara as soon as those wrap. Hugo, I want to thank you for joining me. Folks, we've got a video to commemorate Juneteenth. We'll show that, and we'll see you later. Thanks all.
National holidays are something important. These are days when we as a nation have decided to stop and take stock, and often to acknowledge our history.
We hold this as a sacred time of jubilee and celebration, but also of pain and anguish.
We've got all of these disparities that we've got to address. And I mean, all of them.
We are gathered here in a house built by enslaved people.
The bill is passed.
And we are here to witness President Joe Biden establish Juneteenth as a national holiday. We have come far, and we have far to go.
We might take a breather, short one, and while we've got some momentum, I hope we can get some of it done. We can have one America if we try.